I was born into a world where hope was a luxury I couldn't afford. My earliest memories are of hunger, not just the growling in my stomach but the constant yearning for something more. We lived in a small, broken-down house on the outskirts of a forgotten town. My mother worked long hours at a diner, barely making enough to keep the lights on. My father? I never knew him. It was just my mom and me, and a daily battle to survive. Food was always scarce. I remember once, around the age of 8, going 2 days without a proper meal. The gnawing in my stomach grew unbearable, and desperation took over. I snuck into the local grocery store, my heart pounding like a drum. I stuffed a loaf of bread under my shirt and bolted out the door, the owner yelling behind me. I didn't care, I just needed to eat. But even in those bleak moments, I had dreams. Dreams that made no sense for a boy in my position. I was fascinated by airplanes. Whenever one flew overhead, I'd stop whatever I was doing and stare at it, wondering where it was going and who was on board. Those planes were my escape. They represented freedom, a world beyond my struggling little town. I spent hours drawing planes in a tattered notebook my mom had found at a yard sale. I didn't know the first thing about aviation, but I was determined to learn. Sometimes, I'd sneak into the library and devour every book I could find about airplanes, pilots, and the mechanics of flight. Those books became my sanctuary, a place where my hunger and struggles didn't exist. School was tough. Not just academically, though that was its own challenge, but socially. I was the kid with the patched-up clothes and holes in my shoes. The other kids teased me mercilessly. "Hey, plain boy," they'd shout, mocking my dreams. But I held on to those dreams tightly, like a lifeline. They were all I had. When I turned 14, things took a turn for the worse. My mom fell ill and couldn't work as much. I took on odd jobs, mowing lawns, washing cars, anything to keep us afloat. But no matter how hard I worked, it never felt like enough. The weight of responsibility was crushing, and the only thing that kept me going was the thought of one day sitting in the cockpit of a plane, flying far away from this life. By the time I reached high school, I was practically running on fumes. I'd wake up before dawn to deliver newspapers, go to school, and then work at the local gas station until late at night. I barely had time to sleep, let alone study. But in those stolen moments of free time, I'd find myself at the airport on the edge of town, watching planes take off and land. I'd press my face against the chain-link fence, imagining myself in the pilot's seat. Those days at the airport lit a fire in me. I promised myself that no matter how hard life got, I would find a way to make my dreams come true. It wasn't just about flying planes anymore, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above the circumstances I was born into. Little did I know, the road ahead would be even harder, but it would also be the start of something extraordinary. By the time I graduated high school, I was barely holding on. My mom's health had declined to the point where she couldn't work at all, and I had to juggle multiple part-time jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. College felt like a pipe dream. But I still clung to my love for airplanes, and I was determined to find a way into that world. One day, as I was cleaning up at the gas station, a regular customer came in, a man named Mr. Walters. He always drove a fancy car and tipped generously, which made him stand out in our struggling town. On a whim, I mentioned my dream of becoming a pilot. To my surprise, his face lit up. "A pilot, huh?" he said, leaning against the counter. "That's a bold dream, kid. Have you ever been in a plane?" I shook my head. "No, sir. I've only seen them from the ground." "Well, that's a shame. Tell you what, come by the small airport on Route 9 this Saturday. I've got a Cessna I like to fly on weekends. Maybe I can take you up for a spin." I could hardly believe my ears. That Saturday couldn't come fast enough. When the day finally arrived, I biked 5 miles to the airport, my heart racing with excitement and nerves. Mr. Walters was waiting for me by a sleek, white Cessna. He handed me a pair of headphones and grinned. Ready to see the world from up there? The moment we took off, everything changed. As the ground fell away beneath us, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. The town I'd known my whole life looked so small from the sky, and for the first time, I felt like my problems were just as tiny. Mr. Walters even let me take the controls for a minute, guiding my hands as I steered the plane. "You've got a natural touch," he said. "Ever think about flight school?" I laughed bitterly. I can't even afford a bus ticket, let alone flight school. Mr. Walters didn't laugh. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "We'll see about that," he said, cryptically. A week later, he showed up at the gas station again and handed me a folder. Inside were brochures for a small aviation program in the next state over, along with a letter of recommendation he'd written for me. "I talked to a few people," he said. "They've got scholarships for kids like you, hardworking, with a dream. All you have to do is apply." It felt too good to be true, but I filled out the application and sent it in, more out of hope than expectation. When the acceptance letter came, I cried for the first time in years. It wasn't a full scholarship, but it was enough to get me started. Flight school was a whole new world. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for aviation. But I quickly realized I was out of my depth. Most of the other students came from wealthy families and had been flying planes since they were kids. I was just a scrappy kid from nowhere, barely scraping by on part-time jobs and loans. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. Between classes, flight simulations, and actual time in the air, I was running on empty. But every time I got behind the controls of a plane, it felt like coming home. I soaked up every bit of knowledge I could, from aerodynamics to navigation to emergency procedures. By the end of my first year, I had earned my private pilot's license. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I was finally one step closer to the life I had always dreamed of. But the road ahead was still long, and I knew the real challenges were just beginning. Earning my private pilot's license was a monumental achievement, but it was only the beginning of a journey filled with challenges. I still had to figure out how to afford the next steps, instrument training, commercial licensing, and enough flight hours to qualify for a professional pilot's job. The costs were staggering, far beyond anything I could manage on my meager income from part-time jobs. To make ends meet, I took on more work than I thought humanly possible. I juggled shifts at the airport's maintenance hangar, refueling planes and cleaning cabins, while also tutoring younger students in basic aviation theory. Between that and my coursework, I barely had time to sleep. There were nights I'd fall asleep in the break room, my head resting on a pile of study notes. But it still wasn't enough. The bills piled up, and I found myself falling behind on payments for my flight hours. One day, I was called into the office of the program director, a stern man named Captain Rayburn. "You're a good student, but we can't let you continue without payment," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "If you can't catch up by the end of the month, you'll have to take a break." Taking a break felt like giving up, and giving up wasn't an option. I left his office determined to find a solution. That evening, I stayed late at the hangar, helping one of the mechanics replace a turbine engine. As we worked, I vented about my situation. "You know," the mechanic said, wiping grease from his hands, "there's a cargo pilot I know who's always looking for someone to help load planes. It's backbreaking work, but he pays cash. Might be worth checking out." The next day, I met the cargo pilot, a gruff but kind man named Joe. He hired me on the spot, and I started working long nights loading heavy crates into cargo planes. The pay was decent, and for the first time, I felt like I was making progress. But it came at a cost. My body ached constantly, and I often showed up to class exhausted. Despite the physical toll, I found a silver lining. Joe let me ride along on some of his shorter flights, giving me more time in the air. I watched and learned as he navigated tricky weather conditions, managed weight distribution, and communicated with air traffic control. It was a crash course in real-world flying, and I soaked it all up like a sponge. By the end of the month, I had scraped together enough money to pay off my debts and continue my training. But the experience taught me a valuable lesson: nothing worth having comes easy. If I wanted to make it in this industry, I had to be willing to fight for it every step of the way. As I advanced in my training, I began building the flight hours required for a commercial license. This meant taking on odd flying jobs, flying crop dusters, towing banners over beaches, and even ferrying small planes between airports. The pay was minimal, but the experience was priceless. Each flight honed my skills and brought me closer to my goal. One day, while ferrying a small plane to a regional airport, I had my first real scare in the cockpit. Halfway through the flight, the engine began sputtering, and I realized I was losing power. My heart pounded as I scanned the instruments and ran through emergency procedures. I spotted a small clearing below and managed to guide the plane down for a bumpy but safe landing. That experience shook me to my core, but it also reinforced my resolve. I knew then that being a pilot wasn't just about the thrill of flying, it was about mastering the skills and keeping a cool head under pressure. It was about responsibility. By the time I earned my commercial pilot's license, I felt like a completely different person. The boy who had once stolen bread to survive had grown into a capable young man, ready to take on the world. But the climb was far from over. My dream wasn't just to fly planes, I wanted to be the best, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to get there. With my commercial pilot's license in hand, I thought the hard part was behind me. I was wrong. Earning the license was one thing, finding a job was another. The aviation world was fiercely competitive, and without connections or a prestigious background, I was just another name on a long list of applicants. I spent weeks sending out applications to regional airlines, charter companies, and freight operators. Rejections rolled in like clockwork. Some companies didn't even bother to reply. My confidence started to waver, but I refused to give up. I kept reminding myself of that boy standing at the airport fence, dreaming of flying above it all. Finally, I got a call back. A regional airline was willing to take a chance on me as a first officer, the lowest rung on the ladder. The pay was modest, but it was a chance to prove myself in the cockpit of a commercial aircraft. When I showed up for my first day in uniform, I could hardly contain my pride. I was one step closer to my dream. The first few months were a whirlwind of learning and adapting. Flying a commercial jet was nothing like the small planes I'd trained on. There were checklists, procedures, and protocols for everything. The senior pilots didn't cut me any slack, but I appreciated their tough love. They pushed me to be better, to anticipate problems before they arose, and to always stay sharp. There were moments of doubt, times when I felt like I didn't belong in this world. But every time I strapped into the cockpit, all that melted away. Flying was my element. I loved the hum of the engines, the feel of the controls in my hands, and the satisfaction of a smooth landing. As I gained experience, I started taking on more responsibilities. I learned how to manage challenging weather conditions, navigate complex airspaces, and communicate with air traffic control across multiple regions. Every flight was a new opportunity to grow, and I embraced it fully. One day, during a layover, I struck up a conversation with a captain who had been flying for decades. His name was Captain Mitchell, and he had a reputation as one of the best in the business. He shared stories of his career, from near misses to picture-perfect flights, and I hung on his every word. "What's your ultimate goal?" he asked me. Without hesitation, I replied, "I want to be the best pilot I can be, and maybe one day, I'll own my own jet." He chuckled but didn't dismiss me. "That's a big dream, kid. But I like your ambition. Just remember, it's not about the money or the prestige. It's about doing the job right and respecting the responsibility that comes with it." Those words stuck with me. Captain Mitchell became a mentor, offering guidance and helping me navigate the industry. Through him, I learned about an opportunity with a private charter company that specialized in high-end clients. The pay was significantly better, and the work was more challenging, exactly what I was looking for. The interview process was grueling. They tested everything, from my technical knowledge to my ability to stay calm under pressure. But I thrived under the scrutiny. When I got the call offering me the job, I knew it was a turning point. This wasn't just a job, it was a step into a world I'd only dreamed of. My first flight for the charter company was unforgettable. The jet was sleek and luxurious, a far cry from the modest planes I'd flown before. The passengers were high-profile executives, and I felt the weight of their expectations with every decision I made in the cockpit. But I handled it with the same dedication and focus that had gotten me this far. By the end of the flight, I felt like I'd truly arrived. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. My childhood struggles, the hunger, the hard labor, and the sleepless nights, it had all been worth it. But I knew I couldn't rest yet. My dream wasn't just to fly someone else's jet. I wanted to own one. And I was closer than ever to making that happen. Working for the private charter company felt like I had finally broken into the world I'd always dreamed of. Each day brought a new challenge and a new destination. One day I'd be flying a billionaire to a meeting in Manhattan, and the next, I'd be jetting off to some exotic island to drop off a family for their vacation. The work was exhilarating, but it also came with its own set of pressures. Flying high-profile clients meant there was zero margin for error. Every flight had to be flawless, smooth takeoffs, gentle landings, and perfect adherence to schedules. I thrived under the pressure. My years of hard work and attention to detail paid off as I built a reputation as a dependable and skilled pilot. Word of mouth spread, and soon, I was being specifically requested by some of the company's most prominent clients. One of those clients was a venture capitalist named Mr. Langston. He was one of the wealthiest men I'd ever met, but he was also surprisingly approachable. After several flights together, we developed a rapport. He was fascinated by my story, how I had gone from a hungry boy stealing bread to a professional pilot flying private jets. "You've got grit," he told me during one flight. "That's rare. I admire that." One evening, after landing in Aspen, Mr. Langston invited me to join him for dinner. At first, I hesitated. Pilots didn't usually socialize with clients, but he insisted. Over a lavish meal, we talked about life, ambition, and the pursuit of dreams. He asked me where I saw myself in 5 years. I hesitated. Honestly, I'd love to own my own jet someday. Not just to fly it, but to build a business around it. Chartering flights, maybe even running a small fleet. He nodded thoughtfully. That's ambitious. But you've got the drive for it. If you're serious, you'll need a solid business plan and some capital. Have you thought about how you'll make it happen? I admitted I hadn't. The idea felt like a distant dream, something to work toward in the far future. But Mr. Langston's interest ignited something in me. Over the next few weeks, I started sketching out ideas during my downtime. I researched the costs of buying and maintaining a jet, the logistics of running a charter service, and the potential market for high-end clients. Around this time, the charter company offered me a promotion. They wanted to make me their lead pilot, overseeing training for new hires and managing the fleet schedule. The pay bump was substantial, and it was a sign that my hard work was being recognized. But I also knew it would tie me down, leaving little room to pursue my own ambitions. I agonized over the decision for days. Then, one afternoon, Mr. Langston called me unexpectedly. He wanted me to fly him to Miami for a last-minute meeting. During the flight, he brought up my business idea again. "Have you made any progress on that plan we talked about?" he asked. "A little," I said, "but I'm not sure how to take the next step. It feels impossible without the right resources." He gave me a knowing smile. "Sometimes, you just need someone to believe in you." 2 weeks later, I received an email from Mr. Langston. Attached was a letter of intent. He was offering to invest in my venture. It wasn't a handout, it was a partnership. He believed in my vision and wanted to help me bring it to life. I was stunned. This was my chance, the opportunity one had been waiting for. But it came with risks. If I accepted his offer, I'd have to leave the charter company and dive headfirst into starting my own business. It was a leap of faith, but when I thought about my journey, the boy at the airport fence, the young man working 3 jobs to pay for flight school, I knew I couldn't let fear hold me back. With Mr. Langston's support, I took the leap. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test everything I had learned and push me to new heights. My dream was no longer just a dream, it was becoming reality. Starting my own business was like learning to fly all over again, terrifying, exhilarating, and full of moments where I wasn't sure I'd make it. With Mr. Langston's investment, I purchased my first jet, a pre-owned Gulfstream G200. It wasn't brand new, but it was sleek, efficient, and perfect for the clientele I hoped to attract. I named the business Skyward Ventures, a nod to the endless possibilities I saw in the skies. The early days were grueling. I was the pilot, the operations manager, the marketing director, and even the janitor. I barely slept, spending my days flying clients and my nights handling paperwork, negotiating contracts, and building partnerships. Every dollar mattered, and every decision felt like a make-or-break moment. Finding clients was the hardest part. I had to convince people to trust a brand new company, and with limited funds, my marketing efforts were mostly word of mouth and networking. Thankfully, my reputation as a skilled pilot helped. Former clients from the charter company started reaching out, curious about the new business. One by one, they began booking flights, and soon, I had a steady stream of high-end customers. But success didn't come without setbacks. During my first few months, the jet required unexpected maintenance that drained my budget. I was forced to dip into my savings just to keep operations running. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a mistake. What if this venture failed? What if I lost everything I'd worked so hard to achieve? In those dark moments, I thought about my mom. She'd always told me, tough times don't last, but tough people do. I reminded myself of how far I'd come, from stealing bread to flying jets, and I refused to give up. Slowly but surely, Skyward Ventures began to grow. I learned how to anticipate challenges, negotiate better deals, and streamline operations. I hired a small team, an experienced co-pilot, a mechanic I trusted, and an assistant to handle bookings. Delegating tasks felt strange at first, but it allowed me to focus on what I did best, flying and building relationships with clients. One of those relationships turned out to be a game changer. A technology executive named Ms. Carter booked a flight to San Francisco for a major conference. During the trip, we struck up a conversation about business and innovation. She was impressed by my story and even more impressed by the level of service I provided. A week later, she referred Skyward Ventures to her entire network. Suddenly, I was flooded with inquiries from tech entrepreneurs, investors, and executives. The Gulfstream G200 was booked solid for weeks, and I found myself facing a new challenge. Demand was outpacing my capacity. I needed a second jet. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Expanding too quickly could jeopardize everything I'd built, but turning down business wasn't an option. After careful consideration and countless spreadsheets, I decided to take the plunge. With a combination of profits, reinvested capital, and another loan, I purchased a second aircraft, a Challenger 300. The addition of the new jet took Skyward Ventures to the next level. Now, I could handle multiple bookings simultaneously, and my client base continued to grow. I was no longer just a pilot, I was a businessman, managing a burgeoning company in an industry I loved. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly soaring. But even as I celebrated these milestones, I knew the journey wasn't over. My dream had always been bigger than just success for myself. I wanted to inspire others, to show that no matter how humble your beginnings, you could rise above them and reach for the skies. Skyward Ventures was growing faster than I had ever imagined. With 2 jets in my fleet and a steady stream of high-profile clients, I was finally living the dream I'd chased for so long. But as any pilot knows, the skies aren't always smooth. Just when you think you've reached cruising altitude, turbulence can strike. The trouble began with a series of unexpected challenges. First, one of my jets, the Challenger 300, suffered a mechanical failure during a routine flight. Thankfully, the issue was caught early, and the flight was grounded before takeoff. But the repairs were extensive and expensive, taking the plane out of commission for weeks. With only one operational jet, I had to scramble to reschedule flights and appease frustrated clients. To make matters worse, a disgruntled former employee, someone I had let go due to poor performance, began spreading rumors about the safety of my fleet. The whispers quickly turned into a small storm on social media, with potential clients questioning whether Skyward Ventures was a reliable choice. My inbox filled with cancellations, and for the first time, I saw my company's reputation hanging by a thread. I felt like the ground was being pulled out from under me. After all the hard work I'd put into building this business, I couldn't believe it was unraveling so quickly. But as I sat in my office, staring at the stack of invoices and repair bills, I realized I had 2 choices: let the turbulence bring me down or fight my way through it. I chose to fight. The first step was addressing the mechanical issues. I brought in a team of top-notch engineers to inspect and overhaul both jets, ensuring they were in pristine condition. I also implemented new safety protocols and maintenance schedules to reassure clients that safety was my top priority. Then, I turned my attention to the rumors. With the help of a public relations expert, an investment I couldn't really afford but desperately needed, I launched a campaign to rebuild Skyward Ventures' image. I shared my story publicly, focusing on my commitment to excellence and the journey that had brought me here. I reached out to loyal clients, asking for testimonials and endorsements, and many were more than happy to vouch for me. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Bookings started trickling back in, and the buzz about Skyward Ventures shifted from skepticism to admiration. One day, I received a call from Ms. Carter, the tech executive who had referred me to her network early on. "I heard about the trouble you've been having," she said. "I just want you to know, I believe in you. Let me introduce you to a few more people who might need your services." True to her word, she connected me with several major clients, including a global sports team that needed regular charter flights. Within weeks, my schedule was packed again, and the company was back on solid ground. But the turbulence had taught me some hard lessons. I realized the importance of preparation, not just for flying but for life and business. I began setting aside a portion of my earnings for an emergency fund, ensuring I'd have a cushion for future challenges. I also invested in training for my team, making sure we were always operating at the highest standard. By the end of that rocky year, Skyward Ventures wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The experience had strengthened my resolve and reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. The boy who had stared at planes from the ground was now flying them, not just for himself but for a growing legacy. The skies ahead were looking clear again, but I knew to keep my seatbelt fastened. Success, like flying, was a delicate balance, and I was determined to stay the course no matter what came my way. After weathering the storm, I found myself more determined than ever to solidify Skyward Ventures as a leader in luxury air travel. The lessons from the turbulence had reshaped my approach to business. I wasn't just reacting to challenges anymore, I was anticipating them, preparing for the unexpected, and thinking bigger. With 2 jets running smoothly again and my reputation restored, I started planning the next phase of growth. I wanted Skyward Ventures to be more than just a charter service. I wanted it to be a brand synonymous with excellence, luxury, and innovation. To achieve that, I knew I needed to expand my fleet and offer something unique to my clientele. One evening, while reading an aviation magazine, I came across an article about state-of-the-art private jets with cutting-edge technology and unparalleled luxury. One model, the Gulfstream G650, caught my eye. It was the pinnacle of private aviation, faster, sleeker, and more comfortable than anything I currently owned. Owning a G650 felt like a distant dream, but I couldn't shake the thought. I wanted Skyward Ventures to have it, not just as a status symbol but as a statement of what my company stood for. The price tag was astronomical, over $60 million. Even with the success I'd achieved, it was far beyond my reach. But instead of dismissing the idea, I approached it like I'd approached every other challenge in my life, with determination and creativity. I started by pitching the idea to my investors, including Mr. Langston. I explained how adding the G650 to our fleet could attract ultra-high net worth clients and open doors to new opportunities. While hesitant at first, they saw the potential in my vision. With their support, I secured a loan for part of the purchase and put up nearly all my company's profits as collateral. Buying the Gulfstream G650 was the riskiest decision I'd ever made, but I believed in the dream. The day it was delivered, I felt a rush of pride and anxiety as I stepped inside. It was a masterpiece of engineering and design, with every detail carefully crafted for comfort and efficiency. This jet wasn't just a plane, it was a symbol of how far I'd come. The G650 became an instant hit. High-profile clients flocked to Skyward Ventures for the chance to fly in one of the most advanced private jets on the market. CEOs, celebrities, and even heads of state booked flights, and soon, the G650 was fully booked months in advance. The revenue it brought in not only paid off the loan but also allowed me to invest in new opportunities. As Skyward Ventures grew, I started thinking about ways to give back. I remembered the countless nights I'd spent staring at the airport fence, dreaming of a life in the skies but having no idea how to make it happen. I decided to create a scholarship fund for aspiring pilots from underprivileged backgrounds, covering their training and helping them break into the aviation industry. Launching the scholarship program was one of the most fulfilling moments of my career. Seeing the excitement in those young pilots' eyes reminded me of myself all those years ago. It felt incredible to know that I was helping others chase their dreams, just as people like Mr. Walters and Mr. Langston had helped me. By the time Skyward Ventures celebrated its 5th anniversary, we had a fleet of 5 jets, a global client base, and a team of dedicated professionals who shared my vision. But more importantly, we had a purpose: to inspire others to reach for the skies, no matter where they started. I was no longer the boy staring at planes from the ground. I was flying higher than I'd ever imagined, and the view was better than I'd dreamed. But as I looked ahead, I knew there was still more to achieve. My journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. Skyward Ventures was no longer just a company, it was a powerhouse. The Gulfstream G650 had elevated the brand to new heights, and with a growing fleet of luxury jets, the business had become one of the most sought-after private charter services in the industry. Yet, despite the success, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to do, more to achieve. One of my proudest moments came during an international business summit in Dubai. I was invited as a guest speaker, a far cry from the days when I could barely afford a meal, let alone a plane ticket. Standing on that stage in front of industry leaders, I shared my story, the hunger, the struggles, the relentless pursuit of a dream. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I truly felt the impact of my journey. After the event, a young man approached me. He was a student pilot from a rural village, just as I had been, and he thanked me for the scholarship program I'd started. "Because of you," he said, "I believe I can make it too." His words stayed with me long after the summit ended. They reminded me why I had fought so hard to get here, not just for myself, but to pave the way for others. But success came with its own set of challenges. The bigger Skyward Ventures grew, the more complicated things became. Managing a global operation meant dealing with logistical hurdles, regulatory issues, and fierce competition. There were times I felt overwhelmed, but I reminded myself of the lessons I'd learned during my toughest days: stay focused, adapt, and keep moving forward. The next big milestone for Skyward Ventures came when we expanded into aircraft leasing and management. Instead of just operating our own fleet, we began managing jets for other owners, handling everything from maintenance to charter bookings. It was a win-win. Owners earned passive income from their aircraft, and we expanded our offerings without the upfront cost of purchasing more jets. This move opened doors to partnerships with major corporations, who saw the value in having a trusted partner handle their private aviation needs. Within a year, our revenue had doubled, and I found myself on the cover of aviation and business magazines. From hunger to high altitudes, one headline read. It felt surreal, but I knew the spotlight wasn't just for me, it was for everyone who believed in me along the way. With success came the opportunity to fulfill a lifelong dream. On a sunny day in Los Angeles, I took delivery of my own private jet, a brand new Gulfstream G700. This wasn't just another addition to the fleet, it was mine. As I walked through the cabin, running my hand along the leather seats and admiring the state-of-the-art technology, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. Owning my own jet wasn't just about luxury, it was a symbol of the journey. It represented every obstacle I'd overcome, every late night and early morning, every risk I'd taken. I thought about that little boy staring at planes from behind a chain-link fence, and I wished I could tell him, one day, you'll be up there. And it will all be worth it. But even as I celebrated these milestones, I never lost sight of my roots. I continued to invest in the scholarship program, expanding it to include mentorship opportunities and partnerships with flight schools around the world. I wanted to ensure that the next generation of pilots, no matter where they came from, would have the tools they needed to succeed. Life at the top was everything I'd dreamed of, but I knew there were still skies left to conquer. My journey had taken me from the depths of poverty to the heights of success, and I was determined to keep soaring, not just for myself, but for everyone who dared to dream. As Skyward Ventures celebrated its 10th anniversary, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me here. From a hungry boy stealing bread to survive, to the owner of a thriving aviation empire, it felt like I had lived 100 lifetimes. But this milestone wasn't just about looking back, it was about looking forward and deciding what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. The company was now operating a fleet of 10 aircraft, including my prized Gulfstream G700, and our reputation was unmatched. We had a global client base, a team of skilled professionals, and a commitment to excellence that set us apart. But the success wasn't just about numbers or prestige, it was about impact. The scholarship program I had started years ago had grown into a full-fledged foundation, helping hundreds of aspiring pilots from underprivileged backgrounds achieve their dreams. Some of them were now flying for Skyward Ventures, a fact that filled me with pride every time I saw them in uniform. I made it a point to mentor as many of them as I could, sharing the lessons I'd learned along the way. But my vision extended beyond aviation. I wanted to give back to the communities that had shaped me. In my hometown, I funded the construction of a youth center, complete with a library, computer lab, and programs for kids to learn about aviation and technology. The center became a place where young people could dream big, just like I had once done. Seeing the joy on their faces reminded me of why I'd worked so hard to get here. Despite all the success, I never forgot the struggles that had defined my early years. I kept a photo of myself as a child, standing in a tattered shirt and holding a toy airplane I'd made from scrap wood. It sat on my desk as a reminder of where I came from and the resilience it took to rise above my circumstances. One evening, as I was preparing for a gala celebrating the Foundation's achievements, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Walters, the man who had taken me on my first flight all those years ago. He was now retired, living quietly on a ranch, but he'd followed my journey from afar. "Proud of you, kid," the message read. "You've flown higher than I ever imagined. Keep inspiring the world." His words brought tears to my eyes. If it weren't for him, I might never have taken that first step toward the skies. It reminded me of all the people who had believed in me along the way, my mom, Mr. Langston, Captain Mitchell, and how their support had made all the difference. The gala that night was a testament to the power of dreams. As I stood on stage, looking out at a room filled with people whose lives had been touched by Skyward Ventures and the Foundation, I realized that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who dared to dream, no matter how impossible it seemed. I once stood on the other side of a chain-link fence, I told the audience, watching planes take off and wondering if I'd ever make it. Today, I own the planes, but more importantly, I own the responsibility to inspire others to break through their fences and reach for the sky. The applause was deafening, but what mattered most were the smiles and the hope I saw in the crowd. As I stepped off the stage, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. My story wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about helping others climb, too. That night, I stood on the balcony of my office, gazing up at the stars. The boy I once was had finally found his place in the world, and it was higher than he had ever imagined. But the journey wasn't over. As long as there were dreams to chase and skies to conquer, I would keep flying, lifting others along the way. My legacy was written in the clouds, and it was only the beginning.